So welcome everybody to our webinar today, where the topic is Up Close and Personal with Allan, Savory, and Jody Butterfield. We are thrilled to have you all with us today. Please note that this call is being recorded 24 to 48 hours to the registered attendees on the Zoom call. I'm just going to briefly run through a few housekeeping items and then we will get started. So once again, welcome to all of you. We're thrilled to have you with us today. We also want to welcome our folks on the live stream on various channels. Hello to all of you as well. Just making you aware you are all automatically muted just to lessen the distraction. And we are doing things a little bit different today. There's not going to be a particular Q&A session. We are really here today to enjoy an hour of storytelling from the pioneers of holistic management. So we will all sit back and relax and just enjoy the storytelling from them today. We kindly ask that you remove any distractions that you may have to really get the most out of the next hour. And we hope you enjoy. With that, I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name is Paige Yungstrom. I am the virtual producer for the Savory Institute. And I would like to introduce my colleague and friend, Abby Smith. She is our Global Network Coordinator, and she will be our moderator for today as well. And she's going to go ahead and introduce formally Allan and Jody, and then we will kick it off from there. Abby, please take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Paige. It's so fun to be here with all of you. I see people I know saying hi in the chat and people I don't know, literally from all over the world. And I want to say especially thank you to the Australians, because I think it's extremely early in the morning there. So thank you so much for joining us from all over, from South America and North America and Africa and everywhere. We're just so thrilled to have this conversation with you. And we have done this in the past for our network, so the Savory Global Network. We have once a year, we get to have a personal conversation with Allan and Jody. And we decided this year that we wanted to really open it up to our new friends out there in the world that are beyond the network too. And so the questions that we have today are often ones that come up when we are sitting around the campfire at the Africa Center in Zimbabwe, and we're enjoying each other's company, and the hub leaders timidly ask a few questions of Allan and Jody, and then they start into this conversation, and it's just the most amazing experience, and it's so meaningful for everyone. So we are opening up that type of campfire conversation to all of us here on the call virtually, because not everyone gets to go to the Africa Center and have that experience with Allan and Jody, and we're all not able to travel. So we'll have a really fun conversational chat with Allan and Jody about things that we often don't know about them, even though they have so much that they've shared with their lives with all of us through their work and their dedication to reversing desertification. So I want to jump right into the questions so we can hear as much as we can from Allan and Jody. So first up, I wanted to ask, what do you both consider to be the inflection points that have gotten you to where you are today? So maybe like the top 2 or 3 decisions that you made that led you here. And Allan, would you like to start with the answer to that question?
I wouldn't like to start, but I will. It was very good that you gave us time to think about these things. And I thought of 3 major inflection points that got me to where I am today. And the first is my early childhood. My earliest memory in life is virtually of lying on my back, hitting a football bladder that was suspended from the ceiling. I was 18 months on my back. They didn't know what was wrong. And apparently I had polio. And then I was dragging my leg around in arms. I was a cripple. I was very small and stunted. The war was on, Second World War. Both my parents had enlisted. They were involved. My father had gone to North Africa. My mother was at a prisoner of war camp, guarding Germans and Italians being brought down. And my first meeting, even of my father, was 1942 when I was 8. And a gentleman with a friend I knew of our family walked into the school grounds. I looked out of the classroom window and wondered who this other guy was in battle dress. And then I was called out of the class, went out, and I was introduced to my father at 8 years old. And I had a wonderful, loving mother, but by the end of the war, she'd become alcoholic. And so really, by that time in my life, I know it now and I realize it, I had become extremely self-reliant. There'd been lots of bullying during the war, Afrikaans-English conflicts. South Africa very nearly went in on the German side at the beginning, so there were a lot of hard feelings. A lot of that carried into schools, and I had become a real organizer of small boys. If anybody was bullied, we couldn't deal with it. We were too small, but my God, I could organize and get small boys together and beat the hell out of them if I had to. And I ended up being a real defender of underdogs. And to this day, cruelty to animals or children really sets me off. So I know that comes from those early years. Then the next one for me really was being a very influential moment was when I was forced out of Africa, which I never would have left. And I was virtually forced out of it and obliged to go into exile. And leaving the home I loved, the bush camps I loved, you can see one of them, my old home in this picture, how simple it was, and having to escape was really a big moment. I knew there was likely to be action leading the opposition. We were heavily involved in the Civil War, and I kept a fueled up plane. You can see it in the picture, and it's got that gray color because that's heat-seeking missile paint to stop missiles following a plane, or hope you could. And I kept the plane fueled up, and overnight I laid a false trail, escaped. In the morning, nobody had thought I would fly out because there was nowhere I could go to. The whole of South Africa was against me. The Zambezi was an iron curtain virtually. And I flew south, flight planning and everything, knowing that if they had me on radar, which they would, if they intercepted, I had a plan. I flew straight into South Africa where they knew I wouldn't fly to if I was trying to get away, because the South African apartheid government was so against me. Anyway, I landed, took a great risk, flew down to a little small airfield, there the plane is, on the airfield, and said goodbye to my children who were in South Africa, because I never knew when I would see them again. My eldest son wasn't there because he was already in the war. And then I quickly, didn't waste much time there, flight planned to Swaziland, knowing the South Africans would know that's where I was going. And then I deliberately dropped to very low level, treetop level, and flew to Botswana so that nobody could track me. And I got out that way. And from Botswana, I ditched the plane, had a squadron leader in the Air Force come and collect it later. And I phoned the British and they said, get to Lusaka, which I did, and then on to London. So that was a very traumatic or moving experience and changed my life incredibly. Now, the third of these, if I'm to give three, really would be the first 4 years in America. It was 4 years till I could go home. There was an amnesty at the end of the war, but I was the one person where some things I'd done in the war were not covered. I could not get back till I got a pardon from Mugabe. And in that 4 years in America, great change took place. And that began with Bob Steger, Professor Steger. He visited my home. By then I'd met Jody, she'll talk about that. And Bob Steger visited our little home. I was very surprised to see him because the universities were so opposed to me and said, come in, have a beer. What's it about, Bob? And he said, look, I just want to know what you're doing. He said, 4 times you've visited our research station. We've shown you everything we're doing. and you just tell us what the result is going to be. You don't ask for the data, and you leave. And he said, each time we've ridiculed you. What sort of scientist doesn't even ask for the data, just tells you the result of an experiment? And he said, damn it, every time is exactly as you spelt out. That's exactly what happens. And he said, what are you doing that we don't understand? And I began to try to explain to him ecosystem processes, tools, influences, how my mind was working. And I'm sure Bob left as confused as when he came. But thankfully, Jody was in the room watching. And when he left, she said, you need to capture that. Nobody understands. And that is how the holistic framework developed from that moment, because I captured that and then we began developing it. So that was a very influential moment. And then the last of them was when we'd moved to Albuquerque, I had a visit from Don Sylvester and Ray Margot in the Soil Conservation Service. And they said they'd been to a meeting in Texas. The academics had trashed me and my work. And they said, but a rancher asked a question. And he said, how come you academics always condemn it, but when we do it, it works? So they asked me that, and I explained it to them. And they said, are you prepared to help us? I said, absolutely. So from that arose the interagency committee. They got onto the USDA, these far-sighted chaps, and within a short time, we had an interagency committee of all the government agencies. And that's when we put 2,000 managers and scientists through training in an intense period from World Bank, USAID, all the government agencies, major universities. It was an incredible period of learning and so on. And so that was again, just amazing. Would never have happened if I hadn't gone to America. And I think we can put the biggest advances we made in the development of holistic management probably down to that training period, the invitation of every person to be as critical as possible, to find the flaws. And my goodness, we spent an hour, first hour of every day was called Anything Goes, to pull anything apart. It was a wonderful period of constructive work. Anyway, so that's the three for me.
That sounds like
Thank you, Allan. Jody?
Okay, well, I am really only going to choose three. We'll see. So I did choose three, and so mine are personal. My first big one was leaving the town that I grew up in, Salt Lake City, Utah, to go live overseas. I had lived there all my life. All my education had been there. I got a degree there. I was in graduate school there, and I said, there's more to life than this, and I had to see more of it. I was a big reader. I'd read lots, but I needed to be somewhere else too. So I saved up $1,000, which was my backup in case anything wrong ever happened to me, and I needed to get back home. So I had that, and I raised a budget at airfare by working while I was at university, and I had that all together, and I left, and I went to London. And I finished a degree there in American Studies, which was fantastic because the perspective I got was quite different. It was quite a jolt to know how other people viewed us. And one of the best things is I finally got an understanding of British humor, which I'd always thought was insulting. And it hurt my feelings so much, but I finally got it. And I never took myself so seriously again. And then from there, I moved to the Netherlands, and I took a job there as an editor of a business journal. And that was really good because I learned to live and work in another language, and another culture, which it became very dear to me because the quaintness of the culture and this broad worldview. What a nice mix. So it was a very good experience, and from there I went many other places, but those were really foundational for me in helping me understand where I fit in the world. My second one was when I left Holland and I went back to America. And I decided I would return to journalism. I worked for Associated Press for a while, and I thought, no, it's not what I want to do. I want to write in-depth stories, and I want them to be stories on agriculture and environment, because I knew that was going to be, that's the subject matter of the future. I just knew it. And so I did, over the next 3 years, countless interviews of ranchers, trying to learn more about agriculture and agriculture in the West, in the area where ranching is the main profession, or livestock raising. And I learned a lot about both those topics, agriculture and environment, and a lot of it was really depressing, especially when I would go to a ranch and those ranchers were being awarded big awards for having killed all of this weed on their property, and by chaining it, burning it, poisoning it, whatever. And it looked like it was nuked. It was to me horrible, and they were so proud of it. And they were led to believe that they should be very proud of it. And so that's as far as I'd gone, until one day I was assigned to do a story on two ranching brothers named the Spurlocks in Arizona. And that was in late 1979. And that's a story that changed my life, because I had never seen a landscape that looked like that. Nothing I'd seen in all those, dozens and dozens of interviews had I been to a place that looked like this. And I wasn't quite understanding what I was seeing, but it was the softness of the land. That's all I can say. It was, and it was grass coming in to cover bare ground. So those hard edges were gone. So the whole effect was softness. It was almost magical. It felt like I was in fairyland. It was the strangest thing. And when I asked them, what did you do? And they would explain, it's like mimicking wild herds, and we did this and we did that. And they just said, you need to talk to Allan Savory, because he's the one who started the Savory grazing thing. You've just got to talk to him, because he can explain it better. And, I thought he was in Africa. I didn't think I'd really have a chance. So I wrote my story anyway, but before I published it, turned out he was coming through New Mexico, and the Spurlocks had given him my phone number and said, you need to call her. And so he did. I about fell over, but I immediately arranged to have lunch with him. And that story was even more incredible than they could tell me. It was just something else. I was hooked. And so my third thing is meeting Allan. It was a real turning point for me. And as it turned out, when I did this interview at lunch, and it was so compelling. I said, I have so many more questions. Can we have dinner? Because I really wanted him to meet my boyfriend too, and who I knew would find him fascinating, and the whole story. And so we had a really interesting dinner. I just became more and more excited about this, and I just said, how come the world doesn't know about this? This is unbelievable. And so I said, let's keep in touch. I want to do more stories, because the world needs to know. And he said, yeah, sure. And so I sent him a book on desertification and asked him some more questions. And then he sent me a bottle of perfume in return. I just said, what is he doing?
Just baiting the trap.
No, this wasn't professional at all. It just stung me. I didn't know what to do. And so I just didn't really talk about it. And because I still want to do the story. And so we kept corresponding, and it was fun, because there was no email in those days, so it was letters, and letters crossed, and he had to ride his bicycle a couple of miles just to go to the post office and get my letters. And it was just it was first quite professional, despite the perfume, and then it was then we just got to know each other, and I it's kind of like when you meet somebody traveling somewhere on a bus or something, you'll never see him again. So you're a lot more forthcoming than you might be. So just got to know him better. And then 6 months later, I was going to be passing through Dallas, and he was going to be near there and could meet me. We said, we should meet, because I didn't know if this was real or if it was like a fantasy. And boy, as soon as we met, that was it. I just knew that was it. And so my life changed in many ways I never anticipated, and so did Allan's. So then, that was it for my three there. You can go on to the next question.
And it's all been done since.
Yeah.
No, that's my favorite story. I love it. I just love it. So, Allan, back to you on this question. What did your 30s look like?
When I got this question from you, what were my 30s and 40s like, I really have to start before that, because by the time I was 30, most of the formative stage of my work had been done, and I was at war, and shortly after that in Parliament. So if it's okay, I'd start from my 20s and say, well, what was life like from there? And so from my 20s, that was a period of intense excitement and so on. I joined the game department when I was 20. They had a minimum joining age of 25. They made an exception in my case, and I joined. And so from that, I had 7 years as a research officer, game ranger, biologist, etc., and then had become an independent scientist, working on the problems because I considered I had to be. And so really by the end of my 30s, I was independent. I was managing farms, ranches, a game ranching company on about 2 million acres, myself and a couple of friends. At least I was consulting over 5 countries eventually, and I was commanding a small special forces in the war as well, and I was trying to raise a family. So it was a very, very intense period of my life, hard to sort out what happened, and always the same problem. Poor land means poor peoples, etc., violence, war. And so whether I was in the army or on my farms or on my ranches or consulting or in my plane flying to other countries, all I was doing was changing hats every day. I was just wearing a different hat, whether I was a parliamentarian or consultant or whatever, because it was the same problem: poor land, poor people, political unrest, etc. Now, when I talk about the intensity of those periods, and I know some of you wanted stories on that. Like any young man joining a game department in Africa, we weren't allowed to join till 25 because it was considered a dangerous job. As I say, they made an exception in my case. And like any young man doing that, we had many, many exciting interludes. I often think of that saying, a cat has 9 lives. I think that means an average cat has 9 lives, because I had way more. I got way more than my share. And some of the other young friends and so on with me, tragically, of course, many of them didn't. And they died early, tragically. So many of these stories from that time, I think really are best for a round of campfire with a whiskey or two. But let me just sort of summarize them, or summarize it. Why I say I've had many lives is because I've had my ribs broken by buffaloes that tossed me. I've had a hippo kill 2 people, then take me underwater. When I was trying to kill it, it took me down in its mouth underwater, crushed my canoe. I was terrified. I got away. Then it killed 2 more people, and then finally I killed it. I've had lions incidents, elephant incidences, parachute failures, at least 3. rhino instances. And if I was to single any of them out, like the rhino hippo, I could say that about it and how terrifying it was. Anybody who tells you they're not scared in those situations is insane. And then with lions, to me, one of the most exciting times was between myself and my staff, we used to kill about 50 lions that were nearly all man-eaters. And that's why we were having to deal with them. And in some cases, because I couldn't get the families to leave the body of the person, they would take them. And then that meant the lion just killed somebody else because we couldn't kill it over the returning to the kill. So in one time, with 2 volunteers, my African Game Scouts, we actually started using ourselves as bait, and not just sitting as bait, but walking between village to village in the dark, literally just walking in the dark, half moonlight, trying to get the lion to attack us in the dark. And then between the 3 of us, we reckoned we'd kill it if we could. And then on one occasion, I had 2 lions charge simultaneously and from less than 10 yards away. And that was a miracle. I survived that one without a scratch, which I did, thankfully. And then with the elephants, I had many incidents, much as I love them and working with them. But I think one of the most frightening for me was when I went underfoot of a charging elephant, and I actually got away from under its feet. And but as I had gone under, I had fallen backwards and had to shoot from the hip, literally. And when I got away from the elephant, I finally was able to kill it. And we found that there was a burn around the bullet hole in its forehead, which meant that it was about 2 inches distance when it was shot. So that was a very scary moment, a great one to survive. So all of these things happened, and then much later, to top it all off, I got shot twice, but that was after. So I've had many lives, more than the proverbial cat's 9 lives.
You done?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to top that. My 30s were a bit different, a bit calmer than that, but still. The reason the first thing I want to say in my 30s was my first date with Allan. So you can bring up the picture, Paige.
You got it, Jody.
Okay, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it was so fun and it changed the way I did lots of things. It's the next one. There you go. Okay, so that on the left, that's our first date. After that 6 months when we, go back up.
There's just the delay. We're all set. Thank you.
Okay. So on the left, that's our first date. After that 6 months, we got together and said, let's have a date kind of thing. And so what we did is we went backpacking in Canyonlands National Park in Utah. And it was the most fun thing I'd ever done, because the packs, those big packs that we're wearing on the right, that's how I used to always go, because I was always carrying water, especially in the desert, and I wanted to make sure I had enough for several days. And Allan, I think he wore that pack for maybe a couple hundred yards, and he said, I'm not doing this. This is not even fun. And so we went to this cave where Allan's on the left, and we ditched the packs. And at that time I was wearing boots. I ditched my boots and then put on more like the shoes you see there. And that was so much fun. It was you could fly practically with that big pack off, and you could walk and run for miles and miles. And so on this first date, I learned all these great tracking skills. I learned to do the peninsular step, which is a way to walk really fast and cover the ground and never get tired. I mean, how cool is that? And minimal water. We hardly had to, I learned what to do when I'd get really thirsty. There were just lots and lots of fun things. But the best thing we did on that trip was we hiked to very high inaccessible. It's a park, they called it Virginia Park, where there'd never been livestock, but there was a grassland. And Allan really wanted to see that. And I'd been there some years before with some biologists who said, yeah, you know, this is amazing. We keep people out of here. You have to have special permission because we don't want it to be trampled on and so on. And so we got up there, and he was amazed, and I was too. And he asked so many different questions than I would ever have asked. And people who are familiar with the work we do will know what it probably looked like, but it was very, very fragile. A few little grass plants with runners over the top, and the soil was like that thick and puffy. So it's amazing there was even any grass, but it was just fascinating. And the questions, that just everything I learned, I'll just never forget that trip. What a first date. I mean, it is incredible. But the really fun thing about it, this, the one on the right, that was a couple of years after the first date. And that's probably the last time we ever used those packs. We found some small ones that we could get around in. And but the reason I wanted to make sure you saw the picture on the left is go to the next slide. And tell me when it's there.
Yes, I have done so, Jody. If you could do me a favor, though, and just get into frame a little bit more. We're seeing about half of you, and I just want to make sure to see your beautiful face. Thank you.
I hope it's my best hand. Okay,
I appreciate that.
So after we'd been married 25 years, we said, let's go back to that place and see what it looks like. And we could not believe it. But see, on the left, Allan is holding the forked stick that we cooked our dinner on, our dinner steak that night, 25 years ago. It was standing up against that wall where we'd left it. And and I'm on the right, and you can see a bit of fire. We dug down in there to see if we could find our old fire, and it was there, with the burnt embers of our fire. You could see where it had come down, you know, it'd been carried a bit by the erosion. And we just couldn't believe it, that we were quite overwhelmed by just that whole thing. And it had so many memories. You just think 25 years and all the things that had happened. It was very, very moving to us. So you can turn that one off. But the next thing in my 30s was a career change. My whole brilliant career was going to be a famous journalist writing about Allan Savory. But then I married him, and I also discovered that Allan had a harder time explaining things, or he had a hard time helping people understand. In that he would say, he would make point A, and then he'd jump to point F. And then people like me were still back at A, trying to figure out, how did he get to F? And so that's what I started working on. I started helping him explain to people like me who weren't getting it yet, because there were some things, some more information they needed in between. And the good thing is when I could say, wait, I don't understand it, he'd come up with these incredible analogies, like and they're all funny and they're clever and they make you laugh. And the one I'm thinking of is like the ones with, how do you understand cause and effect? Well, okay, the guy is hitting your head on the head with a hammer, and you get a headache. You might take some aspirin. That's the symptom. That's the effect. But you could stop it if you just address the cause, which is this guy hitting you on the head with a hammer. And there were dozens and dozens of things like that. He was so clever in the way he could explain things to make people understand that I was really glad I was asking the questions. I was at the very first course he did in the States, and that was in 1980. And when he presented everything at that course over the week that he was there, he had a partner who was doing the second week. I was stunned. I said, I thought I understood, but I learned so much more. And there was so much more he hadn't told me about. And then the second course, it was like, was I even at the first course? I can't believe I learned everything all over again, different things. And this went on course after course. I mean, after the 10th one, I was still saying, wow, when am I going to stop learning something new? I said, Allan, you've got to share more of this, because it wasn't that it was just he was forgetting to say things. It's just he was kept learning, and so it just got better and better. And finally, we were getting to a place where it's time to write a book. We've got to write a book about this, and at least get it down. So if anything ever happened to Allan, we'd know, boy, this is where his thoughts were. This is where it's going. And so we fortunately found a really wonderful writer to work with, who is Sam Bingham, and it worked really well for us. Probably not for Sam, but Allan would write a draft, beautiful long draft, and with all full of point A's going to point F's. Sam would get through that. He made it fun, lively, engaging. But he kind of had to figure out to make up or use his imagination on how Allan got from A to F. And so Allan would look at it and say, no, that's not what I meant. I'd say, Allan, okay, well, let's fix it. So then I would try and fix that, keeping as much of Sam's stuff as I could because it was so good, and still making it be what Allan wanted it to be. So we were working along nicely then. And then we were like 3 years into this book. And then in 1987, as Allan just mentioned, he was shot. And I was thinking, oh, we're never going to finish. He's going to die, and the book's not going to. Anyway, what happened was he was just out camping with a group of trainees in northern New Mexico, and slept in camped out in a forest where he probably shouldn't have if he'd known what it's like there. And so some local thugs drinking beer came and shot up the camp, but probably didn't even know Allan was sleeping by the fire where he got shot. He lifted his head up, it missed his head and went through his shoulder and blew his shoulder out. And so it was a terrible thing, but I knew he was going to make it. I just knew he was. And he was determined. He was going to get his arm just dangled for a long time. And by the end of the year, he'd recovered. But this is what polio survivors do. They are amazing recovering people. He exercised. He got it. But he kept on with the book. And in our house, we rigged up we had a big ring in the ceiling that we screwed in, and he had to have his arm up like this. Holding it because his shoulder, they'd had to cut a bunch of it out because it was dead tissue. And so they had this big wedge out, and they had to sew it up like that. And if he put his arm down like that, it was gonna split open. So he had to have it like this. It was in a brace, or he had it up like that. So he sat at his little typewriter, and he, with his right hand and his left hand up, trying to type that and get that finished. And eventually we finally did get it finished, and it was such a relief to me, because then I just realized, okay, now people will know this is what Allan Savory thought, and this is what he knew and what he understood in 1988 and wanted to share. So at least there was something, some record, and I was much, much happier. Then my last thing was forming a nonprofit, and we did that in 1984, the first one we formed. And Allan mentioned that, but it was, neither of us really knew anything about how you manage a nonprofit or even how you run it, how they work. And we made so many mistakes, and some of them came back to haunt us. But it was still the right thing to do, because the first time we had a gathering in like 1985, we had ranchers and farmers and environmentalists and government people all coming together. And actually discovering that they liked each other and that they had some things in common. And I mean, now that happens all the time, and it's no big deal. But I think for most of those people, the only time they'd ever mingled was in a courtroom, because there was some legal battle on. And so that was just exciting. I knew we were getting somewhere. So that was my 30s.
Oh my goodness. Well, Jody, Yes, yes. Would you just jump right into telling us a story that you'll never forget?
Okay.
You do it.
Well, yes, yes.
She asked me.
Okay.
But you go ahead.
The one that I will never forget is the day. Bear in mind, I was brought up in Africa. I'd have colonialism, Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, etc. We were brought up as white paternalists. So I was white in Africa. My family had been in Africa a long time. My grandfather, when he died, two of his servants were at his funeral. One had been with him for 72 years. The other one was still regarded as a new boy. He'd only been 54 years with my grandfather. And so we were paternalistic. And essentially, our role was to lead. And that was sort of colonialism, that period. So you have to view it at that time. Now, there was a day and a moment when any taint of racism ended for me, totally. And what had happened was I was 20 years old at the time. I was dealing with problem elephants. We had some elephants raiding. I had two Africans with me, game scouts, or guards, as we call them, and one cook in camp. We heard the elephants at night. At dawn, we were on their tracks, and they just got moving. And so we tracked that small herd of elephants for 11 hours and caught up with them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I judged that it was too far from the scene of the crime to shoot them. So I just fired a shot over their backs to let them know they'd been followed, and off they ran. Now we had to go back to camp. We'd had no food, no water, 11 hours out. And so we started back for camp. We had no meat back in camp, very little food. So I shot a reed buck and said to the two guys with me, I said, let's just cut off the meat we need and let's get moving. We've got a long way to go. It's going to get dark. And I'd all my life from very young given orders to servants and people in Africa and always been obeyed. And they turned on me. And they just said, no, we are men. We're in the game department. We do not leave meat in the bush. And it just hit me between the eyes. Oh my God. These guys are as proud as I am. They're exactly like me. They're not going to go back into camp and say to the cook, when he says, where's the rest of the reed buck? That's a 150-pound animal. And you've got a few pounds of meat. Where's the rest? Oh, we left it in the bush. They're not going to say that. They're going to carry it back. So literally, my attitude changed then. I said, right, cut it. Put a pole between its legs. We did it. I said, pick up one end. One of them did. I picked up the other end. I said, let's go. We had heavy rifles to carry as well. And I never put that reed buck down until we got into camp. Every half hour or so, they said, can we rest? I said, yeah, you can rest a bit. And they would change place. Then they would say, could they change place with me? I said, no, we're in the game department. We don't stop. And we did not stop till we put it in camp. My shoulders were aching. They were numb. I had a splitting headache. But I was not going to stop until we got to camp way after midnight. And my life changed.
Whew. Okay, do you want me to go on with mine, Abby? There are so many stories I could have told. This is really hard because I won't forget a whole bunch of them. I mean, we've been in an ocean with giant waves and capsized our boat and had to swim back and we ran into a herd of buffalo one time that had been spooked by lions and for fun, because that's what Allan does for fun. And so many things I won't forget, but so I thought, okay, what's a different one? And it was a time that we flew our little Comanche single engine airplane to the West Indies. It was the last trip that we did to the home we were about to sell there, because that's where Allan had first gone to exile. And so, as everybody knows, or every pilot knows, as soon as you are flying over water and you can't see land anywhere, your engine starts running rough. And so, of course, ours did. But then, like halfway through the Gulf of Mexico, we lost all the electricity, the generator gone. And so that's it's a big a deal. I mean, the plane's not going to crash. But why it is a big deal is because you lose your instruments. And at that time, the only navigation, that was really safe, there was a thing called a Loran that ships use at sea, and they just made them available for planes. So that's why we felt safe. We could fly across there. Well, that went because there was no electricity. And so we had to fly by dead reckoning, just like, in the old days, like, all those famous pilots who flew across the oceans. And it's real, if you know flying, you know that if you tip your wings just slightly, you're actually turning. And there are just so many things you can do wrong. And then you look at your compass, but it turns out that the winds are really pulling you this way, and you don't know, because flying by dead reckoning, you have to estimate. So we were flying, and it's a beautiful blue day, and it's kind of misty, and you cannot see where the sky ends, the water begins. You can see why people get disoriented and end up flying backwards, upside down, because it's just solid blue everywhere. So we did that for an hour, and finally, we saw this little platinum strip, and we knew we were on the Gulf, in Mexico. It was the Yucatan Peninsula. And so we landed, and all was good. And a couple of pilots, we went in just to a coffee shop there, and a couple of pilots said, "Wow, you flew a single engine plane over the water? Why would you ever do that? It's much safer to fly with a twin engine plane." And Allan just said, no, it's not, because then you just double your chances of engine failure when you've got two of them. And that was that. So
oh my goodness. That's amazing. Thank you, Jody. When you started your training in consulting, who was the most receptive to your new ideas, and why do you think they were receptive? And
let me start that one. It would not be the training, because the training came much later. So when I started the consulting, let me talk about that. Frankly, nobody was coming to me. And I was by then an independent scientist. I was hated by ranchers, ranching industry, coined those words, was violently anti-cattle, like any environmentalist ecologists, had the beliefs of that in my university teaching. And the whole aim of game ranching was so that we could get rid of cattle. Now, in that environment, there was a knock on my door in Bulawayo, where I was living at the time, in the cities, and it was an old ranching couple, Edward and Evelyn Rushmore, old Bulawayo ranching family, lovely people, and they'd come to see me, and I said, come in and have some tea. I was very surprised they would come to see me, because they were well-established ranchers, and I said, what is it about? Why have you come to see me? And they said, we have followed the advice of every researcher. We go to the research stations frequently. The extension people are frequently on our place. We love our land, and it is deteriorating. We know that. And we listen to what you're saying, and we want to know if you can help us. And I was just amazed. I literally didn't believe that ranchers loved their land like I did. And I realized then, oh my goodness, they do. So we talked about it, and I explained to them, I said, look, I have no idea what to do. I've got an inkling of what the problem is. I'm struggling, one condition. And they said, what is that? And then I said that it'll be the blind leading the blind. I do not know what to do, but I will work it out. And so on that basis, I began consulting. Until then, I hadn't. And then that read one thing to another until we began to get a breakthrough. I realized we had to use livestock, and then worked out the planning process and so on. And that led to such demand for consulting, and particularly because I began to say to ranchers, it was standard because they weren't used to ever paying for advice. They got it free from government and so on. And so I began saying, well, look, with ranchers, if I do agree to help you, I will guarantee to double your production, or you get all your money back. So I did that in what I call double or quits and so on. And that went on for the next 15 years, just expanding and expanding and expanding till I had to buy a plane and was working over. And then the training came much later, when we just couldn't help enough people one-on-one. And so we began training people. And then the same with the training. All the early ones were very frank about it. They just said we were going broke. There was nothing to lose, everything to gain by coming and listening and coming to you. And so most people came because they were just reaching the end of the road. That was the main one. There were always some people because they were passionate about their land, and early people who adopt things. But the majority, they were frank about it.
I'm not answering.
You're not answering it?
No. No, I mean, I could just say what is similar to what Allan ended with. A lot of the real progressive people.
You're in Zimbabwe, and then half the year in the United States. How do you adapt to such contrasting societies?
You know, it's not, when we first come here after having been in the States for 3 or 4 months or whatever, you just have to slow down because things don't work. Electricity might be down. You have to go to town to buy fuel, and you have to wait for it. It's not always there. And you have to juggle your money with this. There's hyperinflation right now. Hey, what do I need to buy today? And change my money today, and then spend it fast. There's just many more things like that that make it more difficult to get your work done. And people still, you know, I don't blame them. They still have expectations that, well, why is she late? You know, she doesn't usually let me down. Well, boy, sometimes it's that can be frustrating at times. But at the same time, what a place to be. Living in the place we do in a camp with just a solar power and a fire to live around, and all of our meals are around that fire. So, and you know, animals all around us, life all around us. It's just you know, it's pretty incredible. So it's really hard to complain. Nobody should feel sorry for me because, you know, wow. And then the same going back. It can be different. I would say it's probably a bit easier going back, but it's keeping track of everything. You know, when you have 2 homes, anybody would know it's what did you leave? And you left this tool in that workshop, and the other tools in the other workshop, and it's hard to remember where. But the best thing is we have such a great team that we work with in the States. I just love the people we work with, and it's so much fun being there. Anytime we're together, I just feel this love oozing out of me. It feels so good. And it's the same here. I just love the people we get to work with. I miss them when we're gone. And so really, we get the best of both. It is not a bad thing at all. I really enjoy it. At some point we won't be able to do it anymore, but right now it's really good.
It is so wonderful. Thank you, Jody. And I feel that same love for the people on the Savory Institute team and the amazing team at the Africa Center. So we're so lucky. Thank you so much for your time and